Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to teach you the names associated with the anchor and the anchoring process, and I'm also going to show you how to properly anchor your boat. The very first step in the anchoring process is to ensure that you have the correct anchor for your boat, that you know the makeup of the bottom that you're trying to anchor on, and then lastly, how to properly anchor the boat. Now, before we dive into anchoring, we're going to start off by reviewing the names for the anchor and all of the items associated with the anchoring system. The first item is the anchor. The anchor is the physical device that you're going to use to hold your boat in place, and this works by digging into the seafloor. The next item is called the anchor rod. And so the anchor rod is just simply the line that connects the anchor to the boat. So in most cases it's going to be rope, but in a lot of cases it could be cable or it could be a straight solid chain. That's why it's called an anchor rod and not just rope or chain or cable. So when you hear the term anchor rod, you know that that is simply the line that connects the anchor all the way to the boat. Then we have the chain. And so the chain is going to help ensure that the anchor rod or the anchor line doesn't get chafed from a rocky bottom. Then we have the bow chocks. Then these are used to run the anchor rod or dock lines through them, and it prevents your boat from getting chafed and scratched up from the pressure of the anchor rod going through them. And then we have the cleat, and then this is what you're going to use to tie the anchor rod to ensure that it is secure when you're anchoring. This is the same thing that you're going to use when you tie your dock lines. You tie it to the cleat as well. Now, when you're selecting the right anchor for your boat, you're going to notice that there's a lot of different anchors with a lot of different specifications. And in selecting the proper anchor for your boat, you're really going to have to think of the application that you're going to be using it for. So on our boat, we use this grappling style anchor. Now, this anchor is extremely effective when you're anchoring on a rocky or a hard bottom. But by the same token, this style of anchor is virtually ineffective on a soft bottom, mud, sand, clay, grass, any of those, this anchor will not work. Now, the reason why I have this type of anchor on our boat is because when we're anchored, it's because we're fishing and we're bottom fishing and we're targeting fish in those rocky, hard bottoms. Now, this anchor has a unique feature because it's designed to anchor in the rocks where the chain is hooked up from the front of the anchor. So meaning we take and we run the chain down the shank of the anchor, and then we put some zip ties on it. So if this anchor were to get stuck, what's gonna happen is these zip ties are gonna pop off, and then the chain is gonna pull the anchor backwards out of the rock and be able to get it out. Now, if you're new to boating or just getting started, probably one of the most popular anchors that probably 95 or 98% of the boats have out there is the Danforth anchor. Now, this anchor is extremely effective in almost any type of bottom that you try to anchor in, with extreme holding power. The only drawback to this anchor is that if you were to drop this anchor in a rocky area, okay, the anchor is not gonna stick or grab well to the bottom unless one of the flukes really drags into a crevice. And then if it gets stuck in there, it's impossible to get it out. You're most likely will damage the anchor trying to get it out, or you might even have to cut the anchor rod because you're not going to be able to get the anchor out. So it works very well in all the bottom types, except you do not want to drop this Danforth style anchor on a rocky or hard bottom. So this is the size chart for the Danforth anchors. And what this chart is shows you the holding power in pounds for each size of the anchor, the boat length, the range, right, for that anchor, and then the anchor weight and the anchor height. Now, no matter what style or brand of anchor you decide to choose for your boat, every manufacturer is gonna have a size chart for their anchor that's gonna show you the same thing. So you'll be able to determine the right anchor that you need based on the size of your boat. Now I want to take a minute to cover briefly the different anchor parts so you understand how the anchor works. The first one are the flukes, and the flukes are what dig into the seafloor and what they dig the anchor in to hold your boat in place. Then we have the stock, and the stock is what prevents the anchor from rolling over, and if it were to roll over, it's going to lose grip on the bottom. Then we have what's called the shank of the anchor, and the shank is what aids in setting the anchor and keeps it weighted down. And then lastly, we have the crown. This is specifically designed to raise the back of the flukes, and so it causes them to go in a downward direction and drive into the seafloor. So now that you know all the terms for the anchor, I want to take a minute and talk about and describe for you the names and the definitions of the anchor fittings. This is really going to help you understand everything when you're purchasing the anchor for your boat. So the first item that we have is called the shackle. The shackle is what attaches the chain to the shank of your anchor and to the anchor rod. Then we have the thimble, and this is what protects the anchor rod from chafing as it moves around with the movement of the boat and the waves. And then lastly, we have the chain, and this is what protects the anchor rod from chafing on the rocks or coral, and it really also helps to weigh down the anchor rod. Now, at the beginning of the video, I said it's very important for you to know the makeup or the characteristics of the bottom that you're trying to anchor on. So I'm going to cover now a few of the most common ones, and these are going to all be marked on your GPS, and they have a symbol, and that would allow you to know what your area that you're anchoring in. But this is critical that you know the makeup of the bottom and the holding power that that's going to give to your anchor. So the very first one that we have is grass, and this could be a very questionable bottom for anchoring because the grass is going to prevent the anchor from digging into the bottom if it's loose grass. Next we have rock and coral bottoms, and while these are going to seem like a really good bottom for anchoring, without that grappling style hook that we talked about at the beginning, the bottom is not going to be effective unless your anchor flukes, like we talked about in the beginning of the video, they get stuck or hooked in one of the crevices of the rocks. But if that happens, it's going to be virtually impossible for you to get that anchor out. The next makeup that we have is sand, and so loose sand is going to be fair for anchoring if you're able to get the anchor to dig deeply. But really what you're going to notice is that if the bottom is firm, hard sand bottoms, the anchor is going to have excellent holding power. Then we have clay bottoms. These are going to provide an excellent quality, holding quality for anchoring because it's a very dense bottom, very sticky bottom, and that anchor is going to dig into it very well. And then the last bottom that we have are mud bottoms. So these are going to vary, and they're going to vary based on the density of the mud. So similar to the clay, if you have very sticky and dense mud bottoms, your anchor is going to grab extremely well. But then if the mud is going to be like a soft bottom or a silt bottom, the anchor's not going to grab as well as if you're in a very dense, thick, sticky mud. Now I want to talk about the reasons why you might need to learn how to properly anchor your boat. And there could be many reasons. You might want to go out with your friends and family and anchor at the sandbar to enjoy a day resting, relaxing, having fun on the sandbar. Or you might want to go and anchor on a specific spot to do some bottom fishing, targeting those bottom species. But the number one most important reason on why you need to know how to properly anchor is because of safety. Let's say you're caught in a storm that you don't feel comfortable or safe trying to navigate through. You might want to anchor and hold your boat in place while the storm were to pass. Or you could be in a situation where you have engine failure on your boat. Now all of a sudden you don't have propulsion on your boat because your motor will not turn on. So in this situation, you might want to anchor your vessel to call for help or call for a tow, and to prevent you from drifting away further from that spot that you were at, you're going to want to anchor and hold your boat in place until help arrives. Now, I would tell you to practice these techniques that we're going to talk about in this video, because you really don't want to try to practice your skills at anchoring until you need to do it, right? So meaning you want to feel comfortable being able to anchor your boat and not have to wait until an emergency situation arises to practice anchoring for the first time. Practice it, get it out of the way so you feel comfortable anchoring. So if the time comes that, God forbid, you need to anchor in an emergency situation, you could do it properly and safely. And always remember, when you're practicing this and you're practicing anchoring, or if you were in an emergency situation, there, believe it or not, is a lot of submerged cables that run all along our coastline. And those are marked on your GPS. Just make sure you're not dropping your anchor in an area where they have submerged cables running through it. That could be a nightmare. Also, if you're anchoring in an anchorage or an area, maybe a sandbar where there's a lot of boats, do not anchor your boat in too close of a proximity to another boat. Because what will happen is, as the tide changes and the wind, the swing of the boats could get the boats to collide, or even worse, you could get your anchor lines tangled with another vessel. All right, now that we got all that out of the way, let's talk about how to properly anchor your boat. So once you've finally landed on a spot that you want to anchor your boat, it's really important that you know the direction that the boat is drifting in. Now, what's going to cause your boat to drift? It's going to either be the wind is going to cause your boat to move, or the current is going to cause your boat to move. Now, it's important to realize this because a lot of people think the wind is going to push the boat. But if the speed of the current or the tidal flow is going to be stronger than the speed of the wind could be coming from your starboard side, but you could be drifting with the current going in a different direction. Now, one of the easiest ways to determine in the direction that you're drifting is to take your chart plotter and you just stop the boat and you could watch the little trail that your boat starts leaving behind, and that will point you in the direction that the boat is drifting. Now, this is going to be important for you to know because when you're ready to deploy your anchor, you want to be traveling against the direction that you're moving. So if the wind is what's pushing you, or you want to be going into the wind, if the current is what's pushing you, you want to be going into the current when you're going to deploy the anchor. You do not want to be going in the same direction that the wind or the current is pushing the boat. You want to be going against it. Now, the reason for this is because if you were to be going with the same direction of the wind or the current, whatever is the greater force that's pushing the boat, and you were to deploy your anchor, the wind or current that's moving the boat is going to keep moving the boat forward, and that anchor rod is going to start running against the bottom of the boat. Now, this could create a really serious problem because this anchor rod could now get tangled in your propeller or your rudder. Now, imagine if this were to happen to you in a storm, in very rough water, where you run a risk of capsizing if the boat were to get broadside to the waves. Creates a serious problem because now you have your anchor rod is tangled in your propellers, preventing you from being able to use your propulsion and control the boat and prevent it from getting sideways in the waves. So once you determine which way you're drifting and you're going against the force, either the wind or the current that is making you drift, and you're ready to deploy your anchor, you want to ensure that when you deploy your anchor, you throw it in the water. If you have a windlass, you press a button. However you deploy your anchor, you want to make sure that you're going in a stern propulsion. So you want to be moving backwards. Now, you don't want to be going backwards fast. You want to have a gradual, slow speed going in reverse when you first let go or deploy your anchor. And this is going to ensure that you are now going backwards and your anchor rod is going straight out, and eliminates the possibility of that anchor rod getting tangled in your propellers or your rudder. Now, an easy way to do this and determine if you're moving backwards is as you're driving forward, going against either the wind or the current, whatever that force is that's moving you, that you determine in your first step, your chart plotter is going to tell you your speed over ground that you're navigating at. Whatever that speed is, you could place your boat in neutral, you could click the motor in reverse, and you will gradually see that speed starting to come down to 0, and then the speed will pick up again. This is because you're taking the momentum out of the boat going forward until you hit 0, and then it'll start moving backwards. Once you have a slow speed moving backwards, you click it in neutral, and then you're ready to communicate to the person who's going to deploy the anchor that is now safe to deploy the anchor. Now, when you're going to deploy the anchor, you're going to have a chain on your anchor. It's going to be very important that that chain doesn't tangle, because if that chain were to tangle and get into a knot or a big ball, that's really going to prevent that anchor from being able to dig into the seafloor. So a good rule of thumb is that you take that chain and you're going to loop that chain around your hand or your arm, so that when you do deploy the anchor and you throw it, the chain is going to fly right out of your hand or off your arm, and you know with certainty that when you drop that anchor in the water, there's no way that that chain is going to be tangled in a ball. Now, once the anchor hits the bottom, it's going to be important that you continue to let anchor rod out to ensure that the anchor can stick and dig into the seafloor. If your anchor doesn't have enough rod let out, the anchor is not going to grab into the ocean floor. So the more anchor rod that you let out, the better chance you have of that anchor digging into the ground. A good rule of thumb is to use a 7-to-1 ratio. So whatever the depth of water is, you would need 7 times that amount of rod to be let out. Now, this doesn't mean that every single time you're going to need that, because it's very dependent on how strong the waves and the current are. But I just want you to wrap your head around that it needs a lot of line to ensure that that anchor can rest on the bottom and the flukes can drive into the seafloor. Now remember, that amount of line that you're letting out, that's called the scope of the line, and the scope of the line is really going to depend on the conditions that you're in. If you're anchored offshore in 15 feet of water on a day where there's 3 or 4 mile an hour wind and there's no waves and it's extremely calm, your scope is going to be a lot less than if you were anchored in 3 or 4 foot waves in 100 feet of water. It's going to create a lot more scope to be able to get that anchor to dig into the seafloor. Now, one very important thing for you to know is that your anchor needs to have sufficient amount of anchor rod and chain out, and it actually lays on the ocean floor. So most people think you drop the anchor and it just hooks and the line is going straight up, but in reality what happens is that anchor is going to dig in, and the more amount of chain and rod that's laying on the floor as that scope starts to go up to your boat, the better chance you have for that anchor to dig in and hold your vessel in place. If you don't have enough anchor rod and chain laying on the bottom of the ocean floor, and you have it at a trajectory where that anchor is facing straight up, the flukes are never going to be able to dig into the seafloor, and that anchor is going to keep skipping along on the seafloor. Now, if you drop your anchor and you see that your line keeps shaking or jerking, just think of this. It's an easy way to tell that your anchor is just slipping on the ocean floor. It's grabbing and it keeps moving, and you see a jerking in the rope or a constant shaking, you're dragging that anchor along the bottom and it doesn't have sufficient rod out for the flukes to dig in. Now, if you were in a center console boat like mine, I could walk up to the bow and I could hold that rope in my hand, and I can actually feel, you could feel it as that anchor is dragging along the bottom. You could feel that vibration coming all the way up that anchor rod into your hand. Now, when that anchor starts to dig into the ocean floor, what you're going to notice is you're going to notice that the bow of the vessel is going to start shifting over, and it's going to start facing the direction, either the wind or the current, whatever was the greater force that was moving you. Your bow of your boat is going to start turning and facing in that direction. And you're going to notice this change. If it's a very calm day, you might not notice it that much. But on a day that you have a little bit of wind or the current is ripping, you're going to notice that bow start turning and facing in that direction. Now, once this happens and you believe that you're anchored because you see the boat turning, it's going to be critical that you verify that you actually are anchored. Now, you could do this with your radar, you could do this with your compass bearing, but probably the easiest way to do it is to look at your chart plotter and the speed over ground that we talked about before. You'd look at your speed over ground. If your vessel is not hits zero and stays at zero, your speed over ground, your anchor is not completely dug into the bottom and your vessel's moving. For you to be properly anchored, your speed over ground on your chart plotter will hit zero and it's going to stay at zero. So if you're looking at your speed over ground and you notice that speed over ground, it might hit zero and then it goes back to 0.2, 0.3, 0.5, 0.20, 0.5, that means that anchor is continuing to drag on the bottom. So it's going to snag, it's stopping your boat. But if that speed over ground doesn't stay at zero, then you're not properly anchored. It could be that you might not have enough anchor rod out. Could be that the bottom characteristics might not be a good holding power, but probably a good rule of thumb of where I would start is to let out some more anchor rod. But for you to be properly anchored, you have to hit zero on speed over ground and you have to stay at zero. So once you've monitored your speed over ground, and it'll happen fairly quickly, and you hit zero and it stays at zero, then you are properly anchored. Now, all of these anchoring techniques are going to ensure that you can safely and properly anchor your vessel. And always remember that when you're boating, the number one priority is safety. If you want to check out more helpful boating tips, check out this playlist.